Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am your host, Kiana Canada. I am a transnational repression researcher, a self-appointed special rapporteur on the rights of Black Americans who are descendants of slaves. And in this video, we are going to be continuing our discussion on intelligence agencies, cyber criminals, and cyber crime. Now, when I was in the university, I didn't do a lot of, so none of the modules that I studied in the university really revolved around cyber crime, cyber criminology. This is extramural learning, and I, just by virtue of being a victim of transnational repression, experiencing digital transnational repression, I have decided to look more into it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, when I was in the university, I had a professor who told me and told the class that anything that we discussed, the things that we wrote about needed to be attached to a theory in criminology. That was when I was doing my undergrad. And I'm hearkening back to that because I think that is so helpful. And I think that's going to frame our discussion and help us to understand probably the mechanics of digital transnational repression and the state. So we're looking at victimology, victims, and we are looking at state power. And we're doing that through the lens and the theory of critical criminology. And critical criminology really concerns itself and focuses on the process of becoming a victim through the application of the label and its reverse, the denial of victim status through the refusal to attach the label or to accept the label. So in this fashion, many groups and individuals may be, or may even claim to be a victim or claim this label victim. But the key question in critical victimology is, who has the power to apply that label to the victim or to the person? That's the key question in critical victimology. Who has the power to attach the label? Now, again, this is critical criminology, critical victimology, and what's interesting is that there is an argument that there's an argument about rights, right? And scholars have argued that victims in general, need to have rights, and those rights need to be enshrined in policies. And sometimes what I've learned is when we look at that label and examine that label victim, right? And it is true, sometimes the state does have the power, majority of the time the state has the power to determine who is a victim and who is not a victim. And I think that should give us pause, right? Because sometimes people are victimized and their victimization is never really acknowledged by politicians or never really acknowledged by the police. And that raises an important question to us, I think, is whether or not they're being deprived of their victim status. When I'm thinking about cybercrime and cyber criminology, I watched a video that was published on YouTube. It's from the policing board here in Belfast, and they do these question and answer sessions. I think it's like either weekly or every other week. And there was a very interesting question from a person named Les Alambi. And from my understanding, he used to be, I think, the director or the commissioner of the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, and he worked in multiple areas of human rights. I think he also worked at the Law Center, etc. And so the question that he asked was about online fraud, ransomware, sextortion, and among other issues. And he also asked about the challenges of establishing a definition for cybercrime. And the PSNI did respond, and they did address those questions. And there was a statement by the Police Service of Northern Ireland that says that current legislation doesn't really, one of the most significant challenges to defining cyber crimes, that current legislation, doesn't really give a definition for that, right? Despite the fact that you have the Computer Misuse Act and other pieces of legislation, which in my personal opinion, I think it does a good job of defining what constitutes cyber criminality. But again, they would disagree, as they did in that, during that session, during that meeting. But what I found to be interesting that wasn't brought up was that the Budapest Convention on Cybercrime, that convention is the United Kingdom as well as the United States and other countries are signatories to that piece of, that treaty, that convention. And so in the Budapest Convention, it has robust definitions of what constitutes cybercrime, and it breaks it apart. And I would argue that they really should use that. I think to reiterate, I think it does an amazing job of defining what cybercrime is. But what was unfortunate is that during that session, it did appear as if the PSNI spoke a lot about themselves and the support that they needed, the conversation didn't feel victim-centered as it relates to cybercrime. Now, to their credit, they did say that they're having difficulties with capturing certain kinds of activities. But just in my personal opinion, which I'm entitled to, the conversation did not sound victim-centered. Now, they did acknowledge that they do need to do more as it relates to cybercrime, and they did petition the Department of Justice for £4.7 million to deal with cybercrime, but they argue that they have not received those funds yet. I would argue that the time that is being allocated to harassing, and this is for the United States too, so I want you to listen to this. So the US, Republic of Ireland, UK even, the time that is being allocated to intimidating and harassing researchers, journalists, human rights defenders, etc., that time should be used to really focusing your attention to people that are actually engaged in criminality. Now, the PSNI officer did mention, ladies and gentlemen, that they did a job a phenomenal job of capturing two persons, right? Two persons that hacked into the transport system. But to reiterate, this focused more on government infrastructure, and it raises an important question as to whether government infrastructure is given, more attention than how victims are being victimized through this kind of practice. And that's what I want to know. What about you? What do you think? Like, do you believe that states such as the Police Service of Northern Ireland are giving more attention to incidents that are impacting government infrastructure and less time and attention to what's impacting citizens and people that aren't citizens, foreign nationals? Now, it's important to acknowledge that, yes, an attack on government infrastructure is a significant concern and should be acknowledged and should be dealt with accordingly. So I don't argue that it shouldn't. But my argument is that I do believe that there is more attention that should be given to victims of cybercrime and people that are, and these ordinary cyber criminals who are hacking into persons' devices and their phones, and I would even argue intelligence agencies, that more attention should be focused on them as well. And this raises a question as to whether the National Crime Agency's failure to investigate digital transnational repression is a symptom of corruption. An argument against my position is that the National Crime Agency they could very well provide this, is that the West are not perpetrators of transnational repression, and therefore my claim is just a conspiracy theory. And we'll sit with that. And while we're sitting with that, what I want to do is I want to address that rebuttal. In this video, I won't be following the Tolman argument model because this is not a debate. This discourse that we're having will be in discussion format. So I want to start with this rebuttal first, right? And to do so, I want to build on Kindness's paper, which is Criminology, Conspiracy Theories, and Theorizing Conspiracies. So we're going to start there. And Kindness argues that the term conspiracy theory is primarily used to describe, quote, deluded, often crazy, and often dangerous beliefs. It is also a term of approbation and stigmatization of all kinds of knowledge, narratives, beliefs, and theories that diverge the bounds of common sense, end quote. Do I agree with that sentiment? I would argue against it because I don't think that when we look at what's happening around the world today, for example, when we look at states that are in the transnational repression literature, we come to understand that this is a real phenomenon, transnational repression. So is transnational repression deluded, crazy, and a dangerous belief? No, it's a real phenomenon. There are people who are silenced. Their dissent is silenced in a number of ways, whether that is through extraordinary renditions, incommunicado detention, enforced disappearances, digital transnational repression, etc. So I would disagree. So kindness argues in this way conspiracy theory, so this labeling, so now we're going back to labeling, right? So remember, at the start of this conversation, we discussed critical victimology. Who is a victim? And who has the power to attach that label? It's the state, right? The state has the power to attach that label. So who's the victim? And when we look at conspiracy theories, this label, conspiracy theorist, it functions to discredit any explanations offered for specific social or historical events, regardless of the quality or quantity of evidence. So what does that mean? So this is knowledge resistance, right? So despite the quality of evidence that a person brings to you, or despite the quantity of evidence a person brings to you, that evidence is never going to be good enough because there's already a label attached onto you. And that label is that you are a conspiracy theorist. So, for example, you could bring evidence that is of quality. So you, for example, I remember when I was at Queen's University, Belfast, I spoke out about political repression and things that were happening to me here in Belfast. And I circulated a petition and got a number of signatures from students and professors and people that didn't attend the university on the petition because I wanted the incident that I was speaking about to be investigated. And each person, so it was over 100 signatures on the document. And each person, I had to actually sit down and explain to them what happened. You know, I had to give them testimonial evidence about my experience and my experience with political repression and why I felt that this violated the law, why I felt that this was an affront to academic freedom, etc. And I garnered over 100 signatures. And so despite the quality of those arguments, the quantity of evidence, so despite multiple people agreeing that this is a huge problem, sometimes those arguments aren't taken as creditable because there's already a label attached to deprive you of your victim status. Okay, so let's go ahead and continue. So kindness says that the cumulative effect of conspiracy theory research has been to reinforce the idea that a belief in conspiracies, quote, is either an individual mental condition or a collective delusion of the mind, and to discredit not only claims of a cabal in control of major events or social economic forces, but even the idea that powerful, wealthy elites might engage in complots to create or maintain a world that serves their interest, and to some extent, they may have succeeded. Conspiracy is a clearly defined, or so that they may have succeeded, end quote. But kindness acknowledges this. Conspiracy is a clearly defined concept in law. The agreement of two or more people to commit an unlawful act. And we know that that is true. And so the question is, when we look at For example, a person that is sitting at their computer and they're hacking into somebody's device, such as a cyber criminal or an intelligence operative. Well, they had to decide if they're working within a company. They had to decide with others to engage in that kind of behavior. Is that not true? So there's a meeting of the minds. You have one person who is the hacker, maybe. So let me give an example. Let's say, for instance, you have an intelligence agency that is outsourcing cyber criminality because they need to get some information, or they want to get some information on a person. They outsource this to someone with IT skills. And they speak to that person and they say, well, this is what I want you to look for, or I want you to collect from this person's device. And they do that by talking to this cyber criminal, or excuse me, this person who has IT skills. And there's a meeting of the minds. There's not a warrant issued by the court. There's not a warrant issued through law enforcement. It's an intelligence agency and this person with IT skills. They meet and they talk about hacking into this person's device. And now, ladies and gentlemen, that person's device is compromised. Well, that is a conspiracy that is factual and not a form of delusion. Okay, so let's continue. What I found interesting in this article is that Usinski and Parent analyzed over 121 years of letters to the editors of the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune, more than 100,000 in total. And they concluded that despite popular hoopla, the prevalence of conspiracy talk has waned in the United States since 1890. So what does that say? That a lot of people are not just making up things out of thin air and, going down these rabbit holes. There is likely a lot of truth to what they are talking about and what's behind the discussions. And we're going to get into that later. But I found that to be interesting. Just think about it. More than 100,000 in total. And they concluded that this talk about conspiracies has, waned. So I thought that was very interesting. So how do we look, or how should we look at conspiracies, right? Like how should we look at them? Like, I want you to keep in mind that I'm not a big fan of conspiracies. I think there's conspiracies like that, what was that conspiracy? I think it was, I forget it. It was Slender Man or something like that, right? Like that's something that is just not believable. But when you deal with situations that are believable, such as a person has gone through something, a person that has gone through something very horrific, and you're trying to make sense of either their unalivement or their situation, in no way can that be going down this path of a delusion or a mental condition or a mental disorder. So, how should we look at conspiracies? Well, rather than dismissing conspiracy theories out of hand, criminologists should consider, and this is what kindness argues, should consider hypotheses about elite wrongdoing on the basis of their merits and the evidence available to us. Conspiracies as kindness argues, are important sociological and political phenomena. History has shown that political, corporate, financial, and military elites routinely conspire to do harm and to deceive and mislead the public. So there is truth to, in this context, what we're talking about in this segment is there's truth around transnational repression. Political, corporate, military elites routinely conspire to do harm and to deceive and to mislead the public. So with transnational repression, to reiterate, the global north does partake in transnational repression, but they call it something entirely different so that they can attach a label onto a person, and that label is about mental illness, etc. And that falls into political, corporate, military elites routinely conspiring to do harm, to deceive, and to mislead the public. Because if you are arguing that a person has a mental health condition, when you are actively putting them through transnational repression, you are misleading the public. And so how else should we look at conspiracy theories? Well, I want to go back to I want to say this. I think that we should look at it as, now to reiterate, I am not arguing that some conspiracy theories are just outlandish and it doesn't have any merit and are not creditable. Or I would argue that there are some conspiracy theories that are not creditable, that they do not have merit, and that they are outlandish. But there are some that are very factual. And I'm not really a person that I don't dabble into these conspiracies. It's just not my thing. I love to just, as a pastime, watch other people talk about it. But me personally, like, I really like to do a lot of research and to really try and get to the nitty gritty. This is what we say in the United States. I want to get to let's get down to brass tacks, right? Let's get down to brass tacks about what really is going on. And that's not a dig against any person, because to reiterate, what one person may be researching and looking into that I'm not looking into is, again, they may know more about their subject than I do. But Foucault argues that perhaps we should view these as regimes of truth and policing the boundaries of acceptable public discourse. Regimes of truth. Interesting. What do you think about that? Should we look at that as regimes of truth? Now, there's something that I do want to bring up, because kindness argues that the conspiracy theory of society, the view that every social phenomenon can be explained by discovering of the men of groups who are interested in the occurrence of this phenomenon and who have planned and conspired to bring it about, is disproved by the fact that few conspiracies do happen. Indeed, they are typical social phenomena. Okay, so let's think about it. What have we seen in the past that did happen, or what was in the past argued was a conspiracy, but it turned out to be true? Well, the Epstein situation for a very long time was argued that that was a very significant conspiracy, and that actually turned out to be true. And so I want to go and say that I want to go and, well, I want to think about, like, in each country, there is, all across the world, there is something that's happening behind the scenes, right? So here in this country, in the United States and other countries, there's something that's happening behind the scenes. And sometimes people discover what that is. And sometimes people speak out about that. And it's not because they're searching or looking to do that. Sometimes it just happens through their personal circumstances. And the question is, when they speak out about it, why? And we're going back to this, right? Because I think it's important. Why are they labeled a conspiracy theorist? And I believe to answer that question, we need to look at the very fact that sometimes what is being done is illegal. So what's being done is illegal, and there is a large cover-up. And to maintain that cover-up, the person who is speaking out against that kind of activity is stigmatized, is ostracized, they need to be discredited. And that is often what happens. And, okay, you're stigmatized, you're ostracized, and you are looked upon as a person who is creating trouble. And what do we call this? It's a moral panic, right? So it's a moral panic, essentially. And it's social hysteria by the mass media. Sometimes people are thrusted into the limelight, and there is this mass hysteria about their persona and the things that they're talking about, the things that they're bringing to the table. And the purpose is to make that person look either unstable, unwell, crazy. And I think that's deeply concerning. That's something that we really should sit with. And I want to talk about, this brings us, I think, to state-organized crime and state corporate crime. So I want to go there, and I want to talk about there. I want to talk about that a little later. But just think about it. Is there someone that you know that the media has created a moral panic out of? And think about whether or not anything that person has brought to the table has later became true. And Cohen's original formulation is worth quoting at length. A condition, episode, a person or group of persons emerges to become defined as a threat to societal values and interests. Its nature is presented in a stylized and stereotypical fashion by the mass media. The moral barricades are manned by editors, bishops, politicians, and other right-thinking people, socially accredited experts pronouncing their diagnoses and solutions. And so we see this all over the world, and we see this all over the media, where sometimes you have an incident that happens and a person gives their diagnosis on it. And that doesn't mean that their diagnosis isn't correct. And in diagnosis, we're talking about their explanation. That doesn't mean that their explanation is not correct. It could very well be correct. But everybody is weighing in on it, right? And everybody has something to say about A or B or C. And sometimes certain persons are made into folk devils, and there's this moral panic around this one particular person, and that's put into place to deplatform them, discredit them, etc. And there are a couple of people that I am paying close attention to, that I am seeing this happen to, and I'm seeing this play out. I'm seeing it play out like right before like my eyes, and I'm pretty sure it's playing out like right before your eyes as well. And for me, it's deeply concerning. But I want to go back to transnational repression and going back to transnational repression and the way in which states in the global north censor the very fact that they are engaged in this. And all we need to do is look back to 2021, and it was revealed that our Central Intelligence Agency drew up plans, conspired to kidnap and to unalive Julian Assange in London. And I'm deeply concerned. I'm still deeply concerned about that. I've spoken out about that on multiple occasions, but I'm even more concerned that the Central Intelligence Agency would do that to someone who wasn't violent and wasn't engaged in acts of that may be perceived as a threat to national security. Now, I was watching a video earlier this morning, and it was from a former CIA agent who stated that the CIA, within its charter and its constitution, that it's not supposed to harm or surveil American citizens. And I actually read that, and I thought that that was true. Julian Assange is not an American citizen. He is an Australian, but it raises an important question as to whether like our government is doing that to us, right? To our own people. It'd be interesting to speak with someone from the CIA to know the truth around whether or not our government is engaged in this kind of behavior. Again, there was one that visited Belfast. His name is Andrew Bustamante, and I did really want to speak to him. Like, I had so many questions that I really wanted to ask him. But again, he alleged that he was here on holiday and just not working and drinking with friends. And so I didn't get an opportunity to really ask him any questions that I wanted to ask him. But that probably would have been a question that I asked, is whether or not our governments do this. Is an important question. And I think this brings us to state organized crime and state corporate crime, because we know that transnational repression is a state organized crime, right? It is. The state comes together and with its proxies or non-state actors, and they decide to engage in a particular activity to silence dissent. And William Chambliss introduces the concept of state-organized crime. Quote, acts defined by law as criminal and committed by state officials in the pursuit of their jobs as representatives of the state. And Chambliss gives examples of our central intelligence agencies as well as other intelligence agencies. So it's not limited to the United States Central Intelligence Agencies. Other intelligence agencies are involved. And regrettably, ladies and gentlemen, drug smuggling, arms trafficking, money laundering, unalivements, and other acts. I'll link this article in the description box below so that you can read this. And the notion of state corporate crime was first developed in 1990 by Michael Waski and Kramer to describe, quote, illegal and socially injurious actions that occur when one or more institutions of political governance pursue a goal in direct cooperation with one or more institutions of economic production and distribution. Let's think to this. Now, people are going to argue, oh, Kiana, you're moving into conspiracy territory, but let's think about it. Elon Musk was supposed to go into the United States and government find all these funds and alleged to have found millions and millions of dollars and millions of dollars in funding that was being given to A, being placed in C, hidden under D, etc. A, B, C, D. And the question remains, and I'm so dumbfounded by the very fact that no one has stopped talking about this. Okay, you had your workers go in and find all this money, but what happened to it? What happened to all that money? I think that is a legitimate question to ask. What happened to all that money you found? Because shortly thereafter, you became a trillionaire. So did that money, did that go into your bank accounts? That's an important question, I think, that we should ask ourselves, right? Because you were a billionaire, and then all of these millions were discovered, and we hadn't heard anything else about it, and then you stopped working for the U.S. government, and then a year later you're now a trillionaire. So is that state corporate crime where there is illegal and socially injurious actions that occur when one or more institutions of political governance pursue a goal in direct cooperation with one or more institutions of economic production and distribution? You tell me. This is food for thought. This is something for you to think about. Do you believe that Elon Musk and his team, his Doge team, went into the U.S. government and found these millions of dollars, and do you believe that Elon Musk and his team gave that money back to, or that money is sitting in a safe place, a safe account, or do you think that money was distributed among Elon Musk and his team? Is, I think, a significant and important question to ask. or whether or not that money is being used for something else is another significant and important question to ask. And this is a very interesting question to ask while we're talking about conspiracies as it relates to Kindness's article, because to reiterate, he does acknowledge that conspiracy is where two or more people come together and they decide to commit an illegal act. And that raises a question as to whether Elon Musk and his team, they came together, they plotted to find all this money, to tell the American public about it, and later pocketed those funds that they found. It raises an important question. Now, what is operational conspiracies? Well, according to Kindness, operational conspiracies include attempted cover-ups of embarrassing or illegal abuse of authority or power, as well as the proximate causes of coups, rigged elections, and destabilization of other nations' politics through covert operations, Black propaganda campaigns, and so on. As this relates to transnational repression, I think we could argue that transnational repression is an operational conspiracy, right? Because when a person speaks out about it, there is state agencies that are covering up this embarrassing practice, this embarrassing illegal practice, by arguing that they're not engaged in it, that the person is suffering from A, or they're engaged in B, or when it is discovered, they have to find some way to discredit the person, right? And so again, operational conspiracies include attempted cover-ups of embarrassing or illegal abuses of authority or power. I would certainly argue that transnational repression, digital transnational repression, is an operational conspiracy, because most victims of transnational repression aren't ever given the label, and sometimes aren't alive to tell their story because they've been unalived. So I think it fits well within that definition. I think I also believe that transnational repression fits within the field of parapolitics. Now, the field of parapolitics, it departs from comparative analysis of discrete instances of elite wrongdoing, and instead is more concerned with and it really does aim to describe and analyze the strange, powerful, clandestine, and apparently structural connection between the security state, big business, organized crime. So if you remember, here in Belfast, I talk about transnational repression, asking why the police service of Northern Ireland has not investigated it, why there appears to be an intelligence agency cybersecurity firm called Nisos Group Limited, located here in Belfast, that's ran by a man named Ryan Lascelles. And as to whether, ladies and gentlemen, this fits within that, right? This, because it concerns itself also with this elite wrongdoing. Now, remember, parapolitics is not concerned with like discrete and instances of elite wrongdoing. It analyzes and describes strange, powerful, clandestine, and apparently structural connection between the security state, big business, and organized crime. The security state would be, of course, what's here in Belfast, such as we have the Police Service of Northern Ireland. The National Crime Agency is the security state. Big business, we would not necessarily look at Nisos Group Limited or any small intelligence firm or crisis management firm as a big business. Howsoever, there are some crisis management firms that are large and huge. I'm not really sure how big Nisos is. I'm looking at their paperwork online, and it doesn't appear as if this is a very large business. And organized crime. And we understand that transnational repression is an organized crime. And so I am interested to know what you think about intelligence agencies outsourcing their activities to intelligence agencies such as Nisos Group Limited, if that is happening, and if Nisos is not doing this on their own, and whether Nisos could possibly be doing this on the behalf of the U.S. government, and whether or not you believe that that falls into the category of organized crime. Now, I want to end with saying that there is a corporate interlock whereby corporations, this is what Kindness argues, that there is where corporations share information. We'll talk about that in another video. But to end this video, or to end this part of the discussion, Kindness says, rather than dismissing conspiracy theories and those who believe them, we should assume a particularist position and evaluate conspiracy theories on a case-by-case basis, according to individual merits. And I agree. Now, that's not saying that what we should do is, agree that all conspiracies have merit. No, should be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Is there enough evidence to demonstrate? Is there enough evidence to demonstrate that there is transnational repression? And I would argue yes, right? I would argue yes. Is there enough information to argue that a person's devices have been hacked and that there is cybercrime happening? I would argue yes. But then going back to Les Allamby and the question that he raised about cybercrime is, why is there not enough, paraphrasing, why is there not enough investigation around this? And this brings us to our discussion on corruption. And police act corruptly when, in exercising or failing to exercise their authority, they act with the primary intention of furthering private or departmental divisional advantage. And there's like this typology of corruption, and one thing that I want to focus on is corruption of authority. When an officer receives some form of material gain by virtue of their position as a police officer without violating the law per se. That's like a free drink, free meals, free services, free vacations, and misuse of professional prerequisites. So that is credit cards, etc. And this is going to be a very interesting discussion on corruption, because I'm going to be reading from, there's going to be some excerpts from Rebecca Dobson Phillips, Elizabeth Dávid-Barrett, and Robert Barrington's Defining Corruption in Context. And what I plan to do during this portion of the video is to not only build on their work, but apply it to acts of transnational repression. And I often apply an autoethnographical position here in this art, in these videos, by building upon my lived experience, because I think it's important to add an anecdote so that you understand exactly how transnational often operates when it's being done by a country that is not normally named for engaging in it. And so what is corruption? Well, they argue that corruption is the abuse of entrusted power for private gain that harms the public's interest, typically breaching laws, regulations, and or integrity standards. They define entrusted power as the power vested in a trusted role in a political or other forms of public office, the private and nonprofit sectors, or religio-cultural institutions held by an individual or institution that exercises discretionary power in relation to another person or entity. So could it be said that members of the public, such as myself, entrust police with, for example, like, do they have entrusted power? Are we trusting them? And again, let's look at the role. Is the power invested in a trusted role in political or other forms of public office? So does the public trust the police? Is this entrusted power? Yes, it is. We entrust the police to keep us safe. We entrust the police to investigate crimes when they do happen, especially when they happen against us. We entrust the police not to misuse their role to victimize us. Abuse. They define abuse as a violation of their duties or misuse of their power associated with the trusted role, either through action or inaction. So remember, when we're talking about cyber criminality, we're trusting the police to investigate acts of cyber crime. And when the police refuses to do that, that's an inaction, and that is defined as an abuse. The scholars make clear that the abuse does not necessarily have to be illegal to be corrupt, and can be a breach of regulations, integrity standards, or both. It can comprise of a pattern of aggregation of activities that amounts collectively to abuse. So again, entrusted power, a person who's being victimized by transnational repression through digital hacking is entrusting law enforcement to address this concern. Yet, law enforcement has not acted and has remained silent, and that constitutes an abuse. Private gain involves financial and sometimes non-financial personal gains that accrue to the individuals or their personal acquaintance, and partisan gains that benefit a particular group or institution. It may include the avoidance of losses or gratification gained through inflicting harm on others. Sometimes states don't investigate transnational repression because they just are connected to other states that are engaged in it. They have friendly relations with states that are engaged in it. So sometimes it is non-financial, and sometimes there are financial incentives. Sometimes there is a promise that the state is going, or excuse me, a promise that the police agency is going to get, sometimes there's a promise that the police agency is going to get, for example, funding for a particular area that they have less funding in. So harm, let's look at public interest. What is public interest? How do they define that? They define public interest as harms to the public interest can include direct harms to the intended beneficiaries of the entrusted power, as well as direct harms as undermining the rule of law or the purpose of an institution, profession, or other relevant body. B, by failing to perform a function whose proper exercise is in the public's interest. And C, violating the established rights of the individual groups. And we know that everybody has a right to privacy, especially under the European Convention on Human Rights. There's a right to privacy, there's a right to non-discrimination, and there is a right not to be tortured or to be ill-treated, etc. So let's continue. What I want to do is I want to do another video on corruption. So I'm going to break this up. So split this up in 2 sections, and that's what I'll do. So we'll come back for part 2.